The Duelist, a story by Andy Holmes. Chapter 1, Missing Person. At any given time in America, there are 90,000 people reportedly missing. Most are never found. 60% of them are male. The average age of a missing person is 34. Oliver Green fit the bill perfectly. His name appeared on the missing persons list 2 years ago, when he didn't answer his mother's phone calls over Christmas. Her name was Dorothy. Oliver's landlord told the cops he'd paid rent on time every month. When they opened up his apartment, everything was in order. Oliver was just gone. His bank account was handed over to his mother, and the rest of his things were thrown away. His bank account balance stayed at $657 for 6 months. Dorothy wouldn't take the money out of it. "My boy might need it," she would say. The ladies who played bingo on Friday nights felt sorry for her. Everyone assumed Oliver was dead or had run off. Dorothy got a new iPhone. She didn't know how to use it very well. Her friends kept telling her about all these fancy things called apps and online banking. A young boy came by the apartment building on Sunday mornings to cut the grass. "Young man," Dorothy shouted. He turned off the lawnmower. "Something wrong?" he asked. "I've been trying to set up online banking for the better part of the day, and this tiny screen is giving me a headache. I've got to make sure my boy has enough money in there." He took the phone and walked her through the steps. Before handing the phone back, he decided to check the balance. "Jesus, lady!" Dorothy pinched him. "Do not take the Lord's name in vain. Do you know how much money you have in that account?" She took the phone, and her eyes went wide. Oliver Green's bank account had gone from $657 to $500,657. The next morning, Dorothy received a letter. There was no return address. "Mom, I'm okay. The money is yours. Don't tell anyone. I hope to see you soon. Love, your son, Oliver." Oliver never came home. There were no more letters. Dorothy bought a beach house in Florida. She spent her evenings reading mystery novels, drinking iced tea, and thinking about her boy as the sun went down. For the next 2 years on Christmas, another $500,000 would appear in that account. Chapter 2, Replacement Needed. Your duelist lost. The gamekeeper's voice was flat, almost indistinguishable from a machine. The man gave Andrew Dickens the creeps. "How is he?" Andrew asked. "Alive. Bullet in the leg. It's lodged in his femur. As usual, the house will tend to his wounds. Once he is on the mend, where would you like us to send him?" I knew the old bastard was getting too slow, Andrew thought. Should have retired him long ago. "Give him whatever he's owed and send him home." "Of course." There was a pause. The gamekeeper waited, giving Andrew a chance to speak. Andrew just stared out the window of his office and watched the sun dip below the spires of the New York City skyline. "In accordance to the rules of the game—" "I know the rules, gamekeeper," Andrew sighed. "I'll have the documents signed, sealed, and sent to you right away." He hung up and called his secretary. She came through the double doors with a black briefcase. It was locked. "Hello, Jennifer." She sat on the edge of his desk and crossed her ankles. Blonde ringlets fell down her shoulders, and she had a $1,000,000 smile. They weren't lovers, but Andrew trusted Jennifer with his life. She placed the briefcase before him. "I take it we didn't win?" she asked. "No, we did not." Andrew pressed his thumb against the fingerprint scanner embedded on the briefcase. The sound of tiny gears whirred inside, and the latch popped open. There was a stack of documents inside. Andrew pulled out his favorite Mont Blanc and started signing. "There goes $3 million. What are you going to do now, Mr. Dickens?" "I'm going to go home, drink whiskey on the rocks until my brain turns to mush, and try to forget I just signed over all of my shares of OPEC oil." Jennifer smiled. She knew wealth. She spent the last 8 years around billionaires. Her own bank account technically landed her in the 1%, but she was still light years away from $1 billion. This wasn't the first time they'd lost a duel, but it never ceased to amaze her how quickly Andrew could sign over millions. "And what about the duelist?" she asked. "We need a new one soon." He finished signing the documents and snapped the briefcase shut. "The universe has a way of providing," he said. Chapter 3, Meatballs. You're fired. Johnny's arms rippled beneath his apron. His pants slipped below his gut. Maybe back in high school, Johnny was an athlete, a football player in his prime, but he'd packed on the pounds. Some of the muscles were still there, buried under layers of blubber. When he was angry, the young and adolescent Johnny returned, fixed glare on the opponent and a single vein bulging across the forehead. Right now, the vein was pulsing. Oliver Green thought it might burst. He'd been fired before. This wouldn't be the last time either. There were no hard feelings, no attachment to this job. Part of him wanted to get fired because it's a universal truth that working at Johnny's Giant Subs, making sandwiches for people in your 30s, was not fulfilling. I'm getting fired because I'm destined for great things, he thought. But Oliver knew he was kidding himself. This was an all-time low. That lady is threatening to tell the local news what happened here unless I promise her and her family free sandwiches for life. It all started when they ran out of meatballs. The most popular item on the menu was a 12-inch meatball sub on Johnny's world-famous sourdough bread. Margaret was at the end of a long day of driving the twins to their soccer tournament, and her calves were knotted from standing. Her throat was torn up from screaming at the ref. The game was rigged. Margaret blew her stack when one of her boys was slide tackled and the ref didn't throw a flag. Little Sammy could have broken his leg. She'd thrown her chair against a tree and kicked one of her shoes off, throwing a tantrum. Now all she wanted was a meatball sandwich, a cold 7-Up to wash it down, because it was better for you than that brown sugar syrup, and a bag of sour cream and onion ruffles. And be fast about it, she barked at Oliver. I've had one Whopper of a day, and I'll be damned if I don't get home in time to watch Game of Thrones. Oliver took note of the fat sailing freely beneath her arms and the twin boys standing on each side of her rotund hips. He decided that this was one woman you didn't want to mess with. She'd call the manager on your ass in a heartbeat. He pulled his green visor down tight over his brow and donned a new pair of plastic gloves. He sliced the bread and opened up the metal container with the meatballs. There was nothing in there but marinara sauce. The meatballs that usually bobbed on the surface were missing. Standard protocol in this situation at Johnny's Giant Subs was to tell the customer the meatballs needed to be cooked, and it would take an additional 15 minutes to make them. Would they like to wait or order something else? What are you just standing over there for? Margaret shouted. I'm in a hurry. Standard protocol could go to hell. Sorry, he said, coming right up. Part of it was because he hated his job, but mostly it was because Oliver was just sick and tired of taking orders from people like Margaret, and McDonald's was always hiring. He wrapped her sandwich up tight. She handed him a Discover card. He told her they didn't take Discover. She scoffed at him and handed him a 20. On her way out, she told her son he had to keep his grades up and go to college, or he'd wind up wasting his life away working in a sandwich shop. Oliver hoped he'd never see her again. 45 minutes later, Margaret walked back into Johnny's Giant Subs, yelling something about how American standards were a thing of the past. She wound up like Nolan Ryan and pitched her sandwich at Oliver. He ducked and it smacked Johnny in his big belly. Marinara sauce exploded like a bloody firework. Johnny wiped clumps of lettuce from his face. Oliver had put balls of lettuce into her sandwich instead of meatballs. This is why he was getting fired. This could ruin me, Johnny moaned. He didn't have anything against Johnny. Johnny had been good to him, but like all good things, his time at Johnny's Giant Subs had come to an end. Tell you what, Johnny, Oliver reached out and squeezed the big man's arm. If you make it on TV, give me a shout out. Oliver tossed his apron aside and walked out. He had no money, no credit, no girlfriend, and a shoebox for an apartment. His future was bright. Chapter 4. Damsel in Distress. Oliver wandered into some dive bar and ordered a beer. 10 minutes later, he ordered a second. He stopped counting after the third. He stared out the window and watched people with happier lives laugh into the night while wallowing in self-pity. It was close to midnight. Time to catch the long train ride home to Brooklyn. Snow and ice glistened on the New York City sidewalk. Oliver flipped the collar of his coat upwards against the biting wind. The nearest train station was 4 blocks away. It started to rain. He had an umbrella in his backpack but left it tucked away and took his time slogging through the rain. He was depressed, and the cold water made him even more depressed. Depression was something he'd come to embrace. The pursuit of happiness had only made things worse for Oliver. A scream pierced the night. Oliver froze, trying to pinpoint the source. Sheets of rain blurred his vision. Maybe it was nothing. A single scream on a Saturday night in New York City could mean anything. It might have been innocent. Some young girl yelling out as her boyfriend tickled her in the rain, or a bartender kicking a deadbeat out of a bar. Oh, God! The shrill of the woman's voice shot out like a wasp, stinging Oliver in the back of the neck. He spun on his heels and ran towards it. It would have been easier to pretend he hadn't heard anything and to drag his way home to a warm bed, burying the memory of the scream deep beneath his dreams. But as terrible as Oliver's life was, he knew walking away from this was a burden he couldn't carry. The woman's voice rang in his ears. As he got closer, the droplets seemed to carry her cries for help, and they reverberated off of his body in a million tiny splashes. Oliver came to an alley and peered around the corner. She was pressed up against a wall. A man gripped her neck as she struggled. Mascara ran down her face. Her lips were swollen, and there was a small cut on her cheek from being punched. Oliver sized the man up. Broad shoulders, built like a linebacker. Not someone you'd want to meet in a dark alley. And yet here they were, in a dark alley on a rainy night, under the moonlight. Oliver was half his size, but as Oliver knew all too well, size wasn't everything. He reached into his pocket to call the police, but then stopped. There was no way they would get here in time to do anything. Oliver couldn't tell if the man was carrying a gun. The odds were against it, but he didn't plan on getting shot in the face. If the guy was armed, the best course of action would be to charge in and take him by surprise before he could draw any weapons. Oliver dropped his backpack, stepped into the light, and charged. Chapter 5. The Test. Andrew loved the rain. The pitter-patter of falling water against the car window humbled his mind. For all his wealth and influence, the weather was one of the few things he could not control. Even the richest man in the world had to take the back seat when nature wanted its way. Perhaps that's why he loved the duels. It forced Andrew to let go and take a gamble like a gentleman, settling things the old way, like the great men that had come before him. If that were true, he thought, then we'd fight the duels ourselves instead of letting champions battle it out for us. On his lap, the glow of his iPad illuminated his face in the back seat of the car. He watched the events in the alley unfold and wondered if Oliver could help him shape the world. When engaging with an unknown enemy, there are two options. The first is to assess the situation, let him strike first, and test him. What's the fighting style? Does he jab like a boxer, or take wild, eclipsing swings, leaving him vulnerable to counterattacks? Once you have a beat on what you're dealing with, a strategy can be formulated on defensive action, and systematic offense can be executed to subdue your opponent. This may be a strike or grapple, or possibly a combination of the two would be more effective. The second option is to forget everything you know about technique and to transform into an animal, trusting instincts and muscle memory to bring down the enemy as quickly and efficiently as possible. Oliver opted for option 2. He needed to end this fast before this guy could pull out a gun or hurt the woman further. The man threw the woman aside and turned to face Oliver. He was calm, his feet poised for impact. This confused Oliver. The man looked as if he were expecting an attack. No time to think about that now. Oliver struck upwards with the heel of his hand, aiming for the man's nose. The man lazily swatted Oliver's wrist aside and took a step back, waiting for the next attack. So he knows what he's doing, Oliver thought. Fine, so do I. Oliver faked a jab at the man's face, causing him to block. A distraction so Oliver could crush the man's toes. He ground his boot heel down and twisted. Nothing happened. He felt big hands grip his shoulders and lift him up. Oliver looked into the gray eyes of the man. They were dead like a shark's. Behind his attacker, the woman was struggling to get to her feet. Oliver brought his forehead down on the man's nose. There was a loud crunch, and pain exploded through Oliver's head. Blood trickled into his eyes, and he shook his head. He was still locked in the man's vice grip. The man's nose was broken, smashed, and curled unnaturally to the right. His skin was torn open, but there was no blood or bone beneath. The moonlight winked off metal plating, hidden beneath the man's skin. Terror flooded Oliver's veins. He was fighting some kind of death robot. He brought his knees upward onto the thing's chest and shoved. He broke free and flipped backward onto his feet. "Lady," he yelled, "get the hell out of here." The woman stumbled and fell to her knees. Lightning cracked against the night sky. A few hours ago, Oliver was dodging a lettuce-filled meatball sandwich, and now he was facing some kind of cybernetic warrior. The thing approached. Big, slow footsteps. Oliver could practically hear the rain pinging off its metal frame. He scrambled for a weapon, something he could use other than his fist to strike with. There was nothing but dirty, wet asphalt. Behind him, the city street hummed with life. He could turn and run, but there was still the woman dazed on the floor behind the monster. Oliver once again charged. 3 quick strikes to the solar plex. His knuckles lit up as if they were on fire. Uppercut to the chin. The impact reverberated down his arm and into his shoulder. He stumbled back and looked down at his hands. The skin had broken open. There was no way he could beat this thing. But maybe he could keep it occupied long enough for the woman to escape. But he couldn't find her. The alley behind the thing was now empty. Maybe she got away. He felt a tap on his shoulder and spun around. He was met by the woman's face. She smiled at him. Well done, she said. She raised a taser. 2 electrodes exploded outward and lodged into Oliver's chest. Electricity scorched his nervous system. He fell to his side and convulsed in a puddle. The woman was wearing heels. Who wears heels in the rain, he thought. The big feet of the thing he was fighting stepped next to hers and stopped. A third pair of shoes appeared, glossy and black-mirrored leather. A thin man with a friendly smile crouched over Oliver. He pulled out a syringe and jabbed it into Oliver's neck. The woman let go of the trigger. The electrical pain ceased, but Oliver could feel the injection course through his body. Darkness took him. Chapter 6. Job Offer. Jennifer had gotten a good night's sleep. The runny mascara and fake cut on her cheek were gone, replaced by perfectly manicured lipstick and blush. She sat on the chair next to Oliver's bed, legs crossed and knees peeking out from a pencil skirt. She brushed his dirty blonde hair from his eyes. Well, at least he's good looking, she thought. She doused a rag with ammonia and gently pressed it under Oliver's nose. He was jolted awake and sprang upright. The girl from the alley was sitting over him. Easy, Tiger, she said. Oliver tried to get up from the bed, but one of his hands was cuffed to the railing. It was a standard hospital bed, but this was no hospital. He was wearing a hospital gown, and his clothes were folded neatly on the floor next to him. His bloody hands were bandaged. 20-foot ceilings loomed overhead, and expensive wood paneling lined the walls. Windows opened up to a sprawling garden full of deep purples and green. Outside of his bed and the stool the girl was sitting on, there was no furniture. What the hell is this? Oliver demanded. What's going on? Well, Oliver, a wry smile lit up across her face, you got your ass kicked by a robot, and you passed the test. A large door banged open, and a slender man in a blue suit entered. He made his way over and addressed the girl. Jennifer, will you be so kind as to get Mr. Green some tea? Oliver pulled at the handcuff. The metal bit into his wrist. There was no way he was going to be able to force his way out. The man held up a set of keys. I'll let you go, but you have to promise to hear me out and not make a scene. Where am I? At my country house a few miles outside of New York City. It's a bit more discreet than the penthouse downtown and far away from curious eyes. He jiggled the keys. You are under arrest, and you are free to go. But before I let you out of those cuffs, I need you to sit peacefully and hear my offer. What makes you think I want to hear anything you have to say? 2 reasons. 1, you don't have a job, and I'm assuming you need employment. I happen to have a desirable spot needing to be filled, and you fit the bill. Jennifer walked back in carrying a tray with steaming cups of tea. In her other hand, a duffel bag swung back and forth. She cranked up the bed so Oliver could sit up, and with his free hand, he took the tea. And the second reason, the man said, is as simple and as crude as money. The man took the duffel bag from Jennifer and unzipped it. It was filled to the gills with hundreds. Last year, your W-2 from Johnny's Giant Subs was $24,456.62. Your tax return was $874.51. There is $50,000 in this bag. I unhandcuff you. You listen to what I have to say. If you don't like my offer, you walk out of here with this bag of money for your trouble and an agreement to never tell anyone what happened to you last night. He folded his hands before his face like some kind of Bond villain and leaned forward. But if you like what I have to say, and you take the job, then I take this duffel bag away and offer you a salary with a lot of zeros. I caught the girl's name, Oliver said, but I didn't get yours. Andrew Dickens, just like the writer. Ancestor of yours? No. Oliver sipped his tea. He didn't see the killer robot lurking around. If these two wanted to kill him, he'd be dead already. He figured it wouldn't hurt to go a little deeper down the rabbit hole. All right, Andrew Dickens with no relation to the writer. You've got a deal. Uncuff me. Chapter 7. Trillionaire. I am a trillionaire, Andrew said. How I came to amass my wealth isn't all that important, but I mostly built my money through intelligent investing, stocks, playing the financial markets, renewable energy, fossil fuels, and technology patents. You know, I'm one of those bad guys in the dark rooms off Wall Street. I've never heard of you, Oliver replied. He slipped off the bed and began putting his clothes back on. They were freshly washed and smelt like lavender. Jennifer stood behind her boss, hands folded with a stoic, expressionless face. She didn't blink as Oliver got dressed. He wondered if she was a robot as well. That's good. I'm not famous, and I avoid the limelight, Andrew said. I'm sure you could rattle off the names of a few famous billionaires whose names grace the pages of Forbes all the time, but not me or my friends. We prefer to... Andrew hesitated, looking for the right words. Hide, Oliver answered for him. He pulled his shirt down and zipped the duffel bag closed. As soon as this guy was done talking, he was going to take the money and leave. He'd been involved with powerful men like this before, and he'd gotten out. Getting out had taken its toll. He didn't need any more red in his ledger. I think staying above it all would be a more accurate statement of how we operate. We? Yes, trillionaires. There's no such thing as a trillionaire. The richest man in the world is Jeff Bezos, and he's worth about $100 billion. You're a smart man, Oliver, and as a smart man, you must admit that you don't know everything that there is to know. I know enough. Do you now? There is such a thing as a trillionaire, and you are looking at one. Andrew clapped his hands, rose, and bowed. I'm worth $3.4 trillion, to be exact. The figure fluctuates every 5 minutes, probably faster than that, but my software can only calculate all of my assets once every 5 minutes. Well, that would make you the richest man in history. No, I was the third richest man in the world, but due to some unfortunate events last week, I've dropped down to 7th place, and my pull over the global oil market has seriously weakened. That's why I need your help. My help? Oliver scoffed. Yes, I need a duelist. A what? A duelist, a champion, someone to carry my banner into battle and help me shape the world. Oliver bent over and finished tying his shoes. He grabbed the straps of the duffel bag and stood up to leave. There has to be some kind of mistake here. It sounds like you want me to fight battles for you or something. I don't know the first thing about combat, and I really don't see how you luring me into a confrontation with a robot where I got tossed around like a rag doll makes me qualified for this job. I just got fired from a fast food restaurant. I'm nobody, and whatever it is you think I can do in the world of trillionaires, I'm not your guy. Andrew cocked his head and smiled. Well, you do know what you're doing when it comes to combat, but you are free to go. Jennifer was motionless. Andrew just stood there beaming. Oliver hesitated, waiting for them to say something more. The sooner I leave and put this behind me, the better, he thought. So that's it then? Oliver asked. Well, it's obvious you aren't even remotely interested in my proposition. I'll just have to continue looking for my new duelist. Jennifer, if you'd show him out. Jennifer stepped out from behind him. Right this way, Mr. Green. Oliver followed her to the door. About halfway there, Andrew called out. The girl is alive. Oliver stopped and looked back over his shoulder. What girl? I'm a trillionaire. A few minutes ago, I recited the exact figure from your last year's tax return. Your annual income is really a minor detail next to her, isn't it? Don't play dumb. We both know I have the resources to pull that skeleton out of your closet. Chapter 8. The Girl. Her name was Rose. Her favorite book was The Pokey Puppy. Daddy read it to her every night, and they both laughed at the end when the chubby Dalmatian made friends with the piggy. First grade was every bit as cool as it looked on TV. Rose had 3 best friends, and they told each other everything. Carmen had a crush on Bruce. She liked his freckles and curly red hair. Joanne had seen her parents having sex. They thought she was asleep, and she was, but she woke up and stumbled into her parents' room while they were doing the deed. Rose didn't believe her. Parents didn't do that stuff. Babies grew inside mommy bellies like flowers in a garden. They just needed lots of hugs from daddy to sprout. Santa bought Rose a bike. It was hot pink with flaring tassels streaming out of the handles and a basket for her dollies. The training wheels had just come off, and Daddy let her ride in front of the house. Don't go into the street, he would say. And she never did. The driveway and sidewalk were plenty. Sundays were for family dinners. After Rose ate her chicken, Mommy gave her a big slice of pumpkin pie with some whipped cream on top. She gobbled the pie down faster than everyone else and wanted to go out for a ride. My new dolly really wants to go on the bike, she said. Rose clipped her helmet on and sat her dolly up in the basket. She flipped the kickstand and pedaled as fast as she could down the sidewalk. Dolly's blonde hair flapped in the wind. The faster the bike went, the more her hair bounced, and this made Rose very happy. Oliver was depressed. His girlfriend had dumped him, and he'd got into a major argument with his anthropology professor. Even MIT has its share of morons, he thought. Apparently, the modern anthropologist could predict if people were going to be compatible marital partners or who would wind up in prison based on the shape of their skulls. Oliver pointed out that plantation owners used to justify slavery because of the shape of the black man's skull indicated a dulled intellect. The professor didn't like this much, seeing as he was black. Oliver drowned his sorrows in a couple of beers and headed back to his fraternity. He didn't care much for the fraternity. His old man had belonged to the same one, and it meant a lot to his mother that he carried the legacy, especially since cancer took his father away last year. Theta Z was a big deal to your father. Your grandfather was also part of that fraternity. Don't be pouty, you might just enjoy it. Dorothy was always so optimistic. Two guys nodded to Oliver as he walked into the house. They were slouched into the sofa, frantically mashing buttons on their gaming controllers. Green blood splashed across the screen as they mowed down aliens. Their names were Kyle and Reese. Oliver wondered if they even went to school at MIT, as all they seemed to do was sit in the living room and play Xbox. He headed upstairs to his room. All he wanted to do was fall into his bed and take a nap. But his bed wasn't empty. His girlfriend was in it, and she wasn't alone. Oliver remembered yelling, and she yelled back. The exact words are buried beneath the terrible memory of what came next. You assholes could have warned me that my girlfriend was upstairs banging some other guy in my room, Oliver shouted. Kyle and Reese shrugged. The aliens were gone. Now a 3D rendered Tom Brady was throwing a touchdown. Sorry, Dad, Oliver thought, but Theta Z can go to hell. Oliver fired up his blue Camry, 187,431 miles, and she was still going strong. Pastor Smog checked the previous day with flying colors. He didn't have a destination in mind. He just wanted to go fast and leave MIT in the dust. The sidewalk was coming to an end. Rose used her foot brakes, but the back tire fishtailed out of control. She fought and twisted the front wheel sideways. The handlebars bit into her chest and she tumbled forward into the street. Oliver slammed on the brakes. A pink helmet cracked his windshield. He leaned back in his chair and panicked. Specks of blood trickled down the spiderwebbed glass. He opened his car door and saw the small girl laying in the street, blood pooling out of her helmet. Up the street, a man was running towards them, yelling. I've had 2 beers, he thought. I'll go to jail for this. The blue Camry creaked as he threw it back into drive. In the rearview mirror, Oliver saw people crowding around the girl. He turned a corner and fled before anyone could grab his license plate. He drove all the way home and parked in his mom's garage. She wasn't home. The blood washed off. A blonde doll had gotten her hair wrapped around his wipers. He clutched it, slid to the floor, and wept. The next morning, he got the windshield repaired. It cost $276. He didn't go to class for 3 weeks and drank himself to the brink of insanity, only leaving his room to use the bathroom, or eat. He kept expecting the police to show up, but they never did. Oliver dropped out of MIT and moved to New York City. He hoped the noise of the city would quiet the guilt in his mind. It didn't work. Only alcohol dulled the pain. He bought a pistol for $300 off a shady character in the middle of the night. At midnight, he sat up on his bed and put the barrel into his mouth and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. Divine intervention. Chapter 9. Still alive. She's not dead, Andrew said. He was staring off into his garden. The words rolled off his lips like a Sunday afternoon. He may as well have been commenting on the weather. They were walking through the green and purple flowers. There was an elaborate fountain in the center, and the trickle of water and chirp of birds filled the air. How do you know? Oliver asked. Her name is Rose Sinclair. Sorta sounds like a movie star, doesn't it? You did a number on her. 7 broken bones and a fractured skull. She spent 3 weeks in a medically induced coma while the brain swelling went down. But she made a full recovery, and if you saw her today, the only sign of the accident is a small scar in the shape of a hook over her left eyebrow. Andrew handed Oliver an iPad. On the screen, a beautiful girl was smiling, holding a diploma. She graduated from MIT? Ironic, isn't it? Graduated with full honors, got a degree in economics, and is making good money at an investment firm. Oliver's hands began to shake. He collapsed into a bench alongside the path they were on and buried his face in his hands. The tears fell in torrents. He'd been destroying himself for over 10 years for killing that girl. Now, she was alive. I tried to kill myself, Oliver said. Andrew sat down next to him. The gun jammed. It was a Glock. I did some research, and the odds of a Glock jamming like that are something on the order of 1 in 10,000. When the gun didn't fire, I didn't find God. I've never been big on belief, but I felt something I couldn't explain. Maybe the universe had other plans for me, and I couldn't leave this place just yet. So what did you do next? Andrew asked. Oliver eyed him. You seem to already know. I know the broad strokes, but not the tiny details. And the details are where your character lies. And if I'm to give you a job, I have to know everything there is to know about your character. Chapter 10. Red and the Ledger. Martial arts classes were cheap. They were even cheaper if you did janitorial work in exchange for free lessons. Oliver swept the floors of the Flying Dragon every night, cleaned the bathrooms, and took out the trash. The Flying Dragon was one of the oldest dojos in New York City, and hundreds of people came there to train and work out. Oliver trained 4 times a week. He'd worked himself to the bone, smacking punching bags and breaking cinder blocks. If anyone ever told you it didn't hurt to break blocks of wood or cinder blocks with training, they were lying. Oliver had the bruises and broken shins to prove it. His blood alcohol content broke the legal limit 3 times a week. He'd sit in a dark corner of some dive and order drink after drink after drink until all 5 of his senses melded into one. A spinning top lodged in his forehead. Over the course of 3 years, he'd been rushed to the hospital for alcohol poisoning twice, and a judge ordered him to AA meetings. He never went. He couldn't lose the alcohol. Martial arts took his mind off things. It was a nice distraction, but the moment he stopped fighting, horrible images flooded into his mind. Cracked windshield, bloody helmet, blonde dolly. Alcohol was the only thing that pushed these images away. He'd become a pretty good fighter. His technique wasn't the prettiest, and within the confines of sparring in the dojo, he'd often lose to men he would pummel in the street. Sparring was built around a point system, not incapacitating your opponent. One night, a man stopped Oliver as he was locking the dojo up. "You can fight," the man said. "Who are you?" Oliver glossed over the man head to toe. He was shaped like a bowling pin, and a brown fedora was pulled down over his eyes. "Name's Reggie, and you got a real talent. There's a place downtown where real fighting happens, not this pansy respectful sparring." "What kind of fighting?" After Oliver's first fight, he was awarded $1,000 cash nicely presented to him in a paper bag. He never returned to the dojo. Bare-knuckle boxing in the underground paid better. The crowds were wild. The smell of dirt and sweat and beer and smoke would fill the air. Oliver could take a punch. He welcomed the pain. Each time an opponent hammered him, the crystal-clear images of that little girl laying on the street blurred. Before a fight, he downed as much alcohol as he could without losing total motor control, and in a strange way, made the pain feel warm. Not quite pleasurable, but the hurt was cleansing, like peroxide burning away an infection. He became infamous for taking brutal beatings, only to rise again and KO his opponent. Getting beat was punishment for what he'd done, for who he'd become. But in the end, he needed the money, and once he was on the brink of losing consciousness, he'd snap out of it and ended things quickly. One night, after a gruesome fight, Oliver was standing in front of a mirror assessing his wounds. His left eye had swollen shut. Pink spots glistened on his sweaty chest. They would bloom into purple bruises by the morning. His shoulders were broad and his muscles were like ripcords. Alcohol made some people fat, but Oliver was training and fighting so much that any extra calories were burned out of his system. "You look like a monster," he thought. "A little girl killing monster." Knock, knock. Reggie was standing in the doorway. A light bulb swung overhead. The brim of his fedora cut a shadow across his face. He dropped a bag of money on the table. "There's $1,000 in there, champ. But the boss needs you to take a fall. Next Saturday, you toss the fight. Make it look good. Take the hits like you always do, but this time stay down. Do this right, and the bag will have $10,000 in it. And if I do it wrong, then the boss will have your legs." Oliver looked up at Andrew. His face was blank. "I didn't throw the fight," Oliver said. "I know," Andrew replied. "But I want to know why you didn't." Jennifer brought them more tea. It was hibiscus. Oliver let the steam flow over his face, warming his skin in the cool evening winds. "How do you know all this stuff about me?" Oliver asked. "I'm very particular about who I hire, and I very carefully vet everyone around me with the utmost scrutiny." "Yeah, but how did you know I hit that little girl?" "I know about the little girl because I know about the little black journal you keep under the 3rd floorboard near the bathroom of your apartment. You detailed the accident quite thoroughly in there. All it took was a little digging to put 2 and 2 together. You have no idea how many criminals get caught keeping journals documenting their crimes. It's an interesting statement about the human condition, don't you think?" Oliver's face went white. If Andrew had a copy of his journal, He could use it to blackmail him. Oh, don't worry, Andrew said. It's our little secret. No one will ever learn of the accident, and if you end up taking the job I'm offering, I want it to be for the right reasons, not because I've got some dirt on you. How'd you get a copy of my journal? I've been watching you for a while now, ever since you didn't throw that fight. You upset some powerful people and walked away with your legs. You see, I have Jennifer here always scouring the market for talent, and when we find someone of interest, well, we vet them, we watch them. Most of the people we monitor never get offered jobs because there aren't many jobs to fill. But I lost my duelist and I must have a new one. What happened to the last one? Did he die? No, I imagine he is resting under the sun in the Bahamas right now getting a tan. Death is not as frequent as you might think in duels. I granted him his retirement. Oliver was puzzled. Sure, he had a colorful background, but when you peeled all the layers back, he was just a drunk MIT dropout who could take a punch and had a mean right hook. And you think I have the talent you were looking for to be a duelist? That's right, but we won't seal the deal until you tell me why you chose not to throw the fight. Oliver looked back on that night. The noise of the crowd filled his head. The smack of glass bottles breaking and the rattle of the chain-linked walls of the fighting ring sounded off in his ears as if he were there now. I took the punches. I threw a couple good ones too. Broke the bastard's nose in the third round. Reggie was in the crowd nodding back and forth, warning me not to do that again. I was supposed to lose. Late in the fifth, I was pinned in the corner getting pummeled. I was drunk. My head sloshed like liquid and I was getting ready to throw the fight. I took a blow to the jaw. Felt something break in there and it hasn't been right since. Pops when I yawn. The bell rang, giving me a breather. As I prepared for the next round, I started seeing things. In the crowd, I saw the little girl I'd run over. My ex-girlfriend hanging off the arm of some brute. My mom with her arms crossed in disapproval. Your father would be ashamed of you, written all over her face. It was my life, my failure of a life staring me down, and I felt this urge to hit back. Maybe I'd made some mistakes, but I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I knocked him out. One swing. Hit him so hard I broke my pinky. I hightailed it out of there, and they were waiting for me when I got home. Reggie was standing in his apartment. Two big, armed men stood on either side of him. Now why'd you go and do that, champ? Reggie smirked. Oliver was standing in the doorway. He looked down the hall and didn't see anyone. Don't think about running. You're stuck, a rat in the trap. There are two more guys downstairs just dying to shoot you. So come in and listen to what I have to say. Reggie sat down at the rickety plastic table in the small kitchen, took off his fedora hat, revealing a bald head. He waved at the empty chair across from him. Oliver sat. What happens now? Oliver asked. You going to kill me? That depends on what you do next. Reggie reached into his breast pocket and produced a manila envelope. He slid it across the table. Inside, you'll find an address and two pictures. A man and a young girl. Their names aren't important. The man did something to the boss, and now the boss wants revenge. You don't need to know what he did. Your job, if you want to keep your legs, is to kill the girl. Make it look like an accident. Oliver tore the envelope open and leafed through its contents. The little girl must have been 12. Forget it, Oliver said, pushing the photos away. I don't murder children. You got red in your ledger, pal. Reggie grinned his yellowed teeth. The only way to get rid of it is to kill the girl. You do this and the boss lets you go. You don't, you spend the rest of your days in a wheelchair and we find some other schmuck to knock off the girl. She dies either way. Reggie scooped up his hat and left. Oliver had a week to do the job. The house was small. It was a long train ride out to the New Jersey suburbs. By the time Oliver got there, it was full dark. The lights were off. Oliver rang the doorbell. A man with small glasses perched on his nose cracked open the door. Can I help you? No, Oliver said, but I can help you save your daughter. You didn't kill her, Andrew said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. No, but it was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. I should have just thrown the damn fight. The sun was sinking below the horizon. Jennifer brought more tea. It was warmer in the house, but the two men didn't move. Oliver continued his story, and Andrew waited to see if he'd found his duelist. If you close that door, your daughter is dead, Oliver said. The man just stood there dumbfounded. Oliver could see his tiny reflection in the man's glasses. See, you pissed someone off. I don't know who, and I don't know what you did, but I was given a photograph of your daughter and was sent here to kill her. I don't want to do it, but that doesn't mean they won't send someone else out here to finish the job, you understand?" The man nodded. "If you aren't going to hurt us, then why are you here?" "What's your name?" Oliver asked. "John." "Okay, John, you have a backyard? Somewhere we can talk in private without waking your family up?" John led Oliver around the side of his house into the yard. There was some cheap lawn furniture strewn about and a tipped-over tricycle. "I thought the numbers were solid," John explained. He was wearing a robe and tightened it around his shoulders. "I checked everything. The stock should have gone up to the roof." "Stop talking," Oliver said. "The less I know, the better. I don't know why they want you dead, and I don't know who they are, but they are going to kill me unless I kill your little girl. And if you don't, they'll just send someone else." John understood the rules. "Do you love your little girl, John?" "Yes, of course." "How much?" "More than anything in the world." Oliver was carrying a backpack. He unzipped it and handed John a small bag. "It's a surgical kit. There are enough drugs in there to knock your kid out so she won't feel any of the pain. I need her left thumb." John went inside and came back out 30 minutes later, Oliver said. His eyes were bloodshot and I could tell he'd been crying. He had his daughter's thumb in a plastic baggie. I told him he had to send her away, burn his house down, fake her death, and have a funeral. Make it all look real good. Andrew said nothing. He was staring up into the fire-apple sky. Oliver continued. "I went back the next morning and the house was burnt to a crisp. I gave Reggie the thumb as proof I'd killed the girl. Told him I burnt the house down because my old man taught me to underpromise and overdeliver. He bought it. I never fought again, and now I drink as much as I can and work at fast food restaurants waiting for the end of my life. You asked me why I didn't throw the fight? I don't know. I wish I had, because then I wouldn't have had to hurt that little girl." Andrew turned to him. "If you hadn't thrown that fight, they would have had someone else do the job, and she'd be dead. You saved her." "Maybe. The weirdest part about it was that I never saw Reggie again. I always thought he worked for the mob. In the movies, once you're roped into the underground criminal world, it's almost impossible to get out. But they left me alone." "Yes, that is strange." Andrew stood up. "I hate to break it to you, but you didn't escape Reggie and his boss. Not totally, anyway. In fact, he's here now. They all are." A strong hand gripped Oliver's shoulder. He turned, and behind him a ghost loomed, a round figure with a fedora. With a finger, the man pushed the hat backwards, revealing a yellow-toothed smile. "Hey, champ." Oliver tumbled forward out of the bench, spilling his tea. The expensive china exploded on the ground. Oliver got to his feet and backed away. Andrew calmly rose and stood next to Reggie. "You never did meet Reggie's boss, did you? He wasn't working for the mob. He was working for me." They all were. Two more figures emerged from the darkness, one smaller than the other. They stepped into the light. Oliver looked on in disbelief. It was John with his glasses, and his little girl was standing next to him. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I had a blast writing it. If you want to check out more of my work, go to www.andywritesstories.com and you can see all of my books and audiobooks and stuff there. And don't forget to check back next week because I'll have the second half of the story and the conclusion up for you to listen to. And if you want to see more of my work, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.